In this activity, we're going to be building on some math skills that are used in the science classroom in a variety of different activities, but we're going to use the literacy strategy 3D Go to help us conceptualize some abstract ideas. So the theme is more probably on scale, and we're going to be setting up 6 stations in the classroom and having the kids go through 3 stations talking about units and scale of big things. And then we're going to have another 3 stations where we're going to be using small units, small numbers, and then we're going to use the 3D Go strategy to represent our understanding of that. Now this has a pretty strong math focus to it, so I thought we'd do something a little bit different this time, and I'm bringing in a special guest from a long distance from me to just talk us through and give us a better sense of kind of from a math perspective, how does this particular activity work? So let's go to Zoom and check in with our special guest. As I just mentioned, I'm bringing in a special guest to talk math with our science and literacy, and it's my pleasure to introduce a colleague, friend, and math guru, Dr. David Costello from Costello Math, Pembroke author with his book, Making Math Stick, and some nice connections with our chapter 2, along with the area of cognitive science. But I figured it would make sense, David, to bring you in and to go through Activity 19 and to sort of pull on your expertise on sort of how do you bring the math into the classroom when you're busy with language arts and science and of course all the other subjects. So welcome. It's great to have you here for the next few minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great, great. So we're going to jump right into it. And as I mentioned just a couple moments ago, this particular activity is set up as stations. And I sort of see 6 stations in your class, and 3 are dealing with, if you like, big numbers, and 3 are dealing with small numbers. So maybe just even before we get started, David, is there, when kids are working with big numbers, well, we'll start with big numbers, but also small numbers, there seems to be something about scale. There seems to be something about place value. Those are not just math, what's the right word? Math problems, math sort of concepts. They cut across all subjects, I suspect, at some point or another. Where do kids sit with this? Is this an area that they struggle with, or is it a fairly sort of easy walk-in for them?
No, so we spend considerable time in math in terms of number. And when we think about how we start off with math, we really work with small whole numbers, and we spend quite a bit of time with that. And we kind of look how are numbers built, part, whole, and whatnot. Students relate well with that because they are typically used to actually working with those numbers in the quote unquote real world.
Yeah.
But when we start to think about even numbers greater than 10,000, when we start thinking about millions, billions, we expect students to kind of apply what those basic principles are. But the one thing that we see is students struggle with the actual comprehension about what are those actual numbers? What is the actual magnitude of that? And similar for how they might struggle with large numbers, they struggle with actually numbers that are parts, decimal numbers, and kind of having difficulty to assign meaning to those, and what do those mean, and how do we compare them, and how do they relate to our experiences?
Which is interesting, right? Because when you get into science, you layer the concept, the universe, the solar system. Those are big numbers, right? The size of Jupiter compared to the size of Earth, compared to the sun. And so you're dealing with all those, the kids are trying to understand the size of these things, but then you layer in units, like in question 1, giga, mega, kilo. So there's the background knowledge coming from language arts. Then you get the exponents that are attached to each one of those, and then you have a word attached to that. So I mean, there's a lot of information that they have to process, and this is not like a one-time see it and get it kind of activity, I suspect. So you could do like in question one, where everything is on cards and you're trying to build the table. You could probably do that multiple times at different times of the year or in different grades, and it would still be a good exercise for kids. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yes, definitely. So, when I saw that activity, and just to have students manipulate those cards, moving them back and forth, just to see what the actual sequence is, and to see how the three different actual representations kind of connect, but then kind of go across and then vertical too, because whenever you were talking about our solar system, I just think how many times if we see a student that can solve a problem with large numbers in it, how many times we assume that they actually comprehend what the actual magnitude of that number
Yeah.
is, where they need activities like this, and they need to come back to them over time so that they strengthen that understanding of it and that ability to call it when they're working with the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Which
Yeah.
again ties back in our book to chapter 2 when we talk about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, coming back and
Yes.
refreshing on it. So what you said there sort of leads us into question 2 then, where we look at we have a number line and from 1 to 1 billion, and we're asking the kids, where would you place the billion? Or sorry, where would you place the million on that line? I would think that that's a difficult, can be a very difficult problem for not only kids, but probably a lot of adults in terms of trying to go back to what you said a second ago of understanding the magnitude of those numbers.
Yeah, it's very, very true. And when I looked through this question, I immediately thought back to when I've seen a question similar when we're talking just from a mathematical perspective, when it's given to students, many will want to put that million closer to billion than to one, because whenever they explain why, because both are quote unquote big
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah,
And I've had grown-ups do the same thing.
yeah,
And it is when we talk about, okay, well, let's think about 1 million in relation to 1 billion. And that really gets me back to the question one, because you can see that, especially in terms of the exponents, you can see what that actual relationship would be. And in all the times that I've seen this question, and this is why I love this question, there is always that kind of shock and like kind of gasp, but like, what? It is actually closer to the one
yeah.
than that. And it's like, yes, but that's why it's so important for students to have that scale, to have that understanding of the exponents. Yeah.
So in this one, it's not so much as the exact answer, it's that the kids understand that it's much closer to the one than the billion.
Yes.
Is that the takeaway from that?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Perfect.
the take away. And because I think what I've taken from this activity is it is individual numbers. It is talking about both them in relation to one and another, which is what we want students to be able to do.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I guess
Yeah.
that third question then is kind of, we called it crazy facts,
Yep.
but really it's that second question there of how many days is this for 1 million seconds and how many days is 1 billion seconds? And when you do the calculation or use Google to look it up and confirm it, um, you get 12 days for 1 million seconds and like 31 and a half years for a billion. And to me, just even seeing that now again, it's like, holy smokes, there's a big difference
Yep.
between a million and a billion. So is it concrete kind of examples like the ones in this one here, Crazy Facts, gets kids to that, not only the holy smokes, but I kind of get it now, right? I see the difference.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I really like about that question coming after question two, because the question two is a great way to kind of bring it to the actual surface. Be like, okay,
Yeah,
this is this. But question three gives it that context to be like in something that our students understand, because they know years, they know days, but this is actually grounding it for them
yeah.
in something that makes sense.
Perfect. Perfect. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, let's sort of go, I guess, the other way, if that's the right way to describe it, and start to. We've been talking about big numbers. I think, though, also small numbers can be challenging. Again, because of that, the place value that's attached to understanding what that means. So if I look at question four, again, we've got terms like nano and micro and milli and centi, which they've probably heard, maybe even in video games in some cases. But it's that exponent where that minus sign is sitting there that has to that has to cause confusion for kids. Just what does that minus sign mean?
Yeah.
Any suggestions for our fail-safe teachers around kind of driving home the point of how that minus sign is important?
Well, when I see that, because that would be what students would automatically think if they're thinking integers, 10, -9, what I see with that is when I connect those first two columns to the actual third column, billions. I can see students bringing it back to a fraction and thinking, oh, okay, billions, the TH,
Yeah,
quote in quote, would act, and I can see that connect for them, because that will help them understand what the actual nanoscale means, but that will also connect to the actual negative sign as
right.
well, minus sign. And that's why, and I may sound like a broken record here, but that's why the three columns are really good, because most times in the whole math world, we tend to actually focus on one of the three, where actually students need to see it across, because that is only going to strengthen their understanding of that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. So then when we go to the number line in question five, the question is, where would you place a nano, a micro, or a milli measurement of any kind? My sense on this one is it's not so much where it fits on the number line, but on which side of the zero does it go? Is that a good way to take that, or should we be looking at this a different way?
No, I would agree with that, because two parts here. I think that we see number lines all too often having a zero at the left. And we want students to have that flexibility with it. And I would be curious to see, are they just going to put the actual nano one to the far left and actually micro to the middle?
Oh,
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
be
Yeah.
curious to see what the positioning of those sequencing three is and where on the number line. Because when they see that exponent, I would think that many of them will be putting it towards a -1 on the number line.
Yeah, agree. Oh,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Great, good. And then the last question we had was sort of just trying to get kids to take some of their science that they would have been doing and connect it to different units. So, when we look at the terms nano, micro, and milli, there is a big difference, right? And so nano is probably closer tied to a virus, micro to a bacteria, and there's some range in there, and then milli being a salt crystal, something that we could see. I don't know if that'll change because of the COVID and the pandemic, and we've talked about viruses more. Will kids know that that's something smaller? But I think the idea with this question is just trying to connect a math concept, if you like, a size to a particular real life object. And this is just three, but I assume that you could do that almost daily and be working through things if you wanted to in your class, as another way of kind of connecting the math back into the literacy and to the science.
Yeah, completely. Yes. Because how many times do we hear students say, when are we ever going to use this? Why do we need to know
Yeah,
this? These are the exact reasons why we need scale, why we need these pieces here. Because I know when we're actually talking about decimals, when we actually can talk up to 1/100th, we tend to use money because
right.
that's quote unquote real world. But then what do we use when we start talking about billions, millions, thousands? And this is why connecting it here to the real life and with this actual science piece, this is what's giving it actually per purpose, giving it actually
Yeah,
rationale.
yeah,
Um, Otherwise, we are just talking about it in a void that they're just going to be like, okay, check, we're going to move on.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you very much for coming in and providing us with some math insight. Again, just as a plug for you and for folks watching, you probably have the Failsafe book, and thank you for your support. But David's books are also available at Pembroke Publishers or at costellomath.com. And if you're looking for ways to connect math into your course, just like you've been connecting science and literacy, I cannot recommend David's work enough. It's great stuff. He's a great presenter. I've sat in and on many presentations and enjoyed them all. So again, David, thanks for taking the time to join us, and really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us here today.
Oh, thank you. And can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
I know this is kind of going off script, but I will say when I was going through this particular strategy, I love the 3D Go.
Yeah.
I love that because when I saw that, I saw it was for a scale, but it just supports the vocabulary, academic vocabulary
Yeah.
across all subjects. Um, and it's just something that I see in the social sciences, in math, literacy. So I just see that as being something like a go-to and a way for students to really strengthen their understanding. So I just wanted to throw that in about the academic vocabulary piece and the 3D Go.
That's great. Good. Again, thank you very much.
No problem.